I'm Michael Corcoran with Institutional Investor, and I'm joined today by the co-founders of Beacon Platform, the CEO, Kirat Singh, and Mark Higgins, the COO. Now, before we get started, a reminder that this is an interactive discussion, so please use the widget on your screen to submit any questions that you have for Kirat and Mark, and we'll get to those toward the end of our discussion. And if we don't get to your question, someone from Beacon Platform will reach out to you in the upcoming days and get you an answer. We also have a few poll questions for you, which you can answer on screen as well. That'll be toward the end, more of a survey, really. Just a quick 2-question survey. And as I mentioned, Kirat Singh and Mark Higgins are the co-founders of Beacon Platform. Both are among Wall Street's premier technologists, and among many other things they both did before starting their own business. They collaborated to launch the Athena trading platform project at JP Morgan. The company they founded together, Beacon Platform, gives businesses and their developers the flexibility and scale they need to gain a competitive edge. And Beacon removes the shared pain of designing new applications and strategies and streamlines the development and deployment process, which in turn enables teams to rapidly experiment with new solutions and business models, and importantly, all on the cloud. So suffice it to say, Mark and Kirat are among the industry's most innovative minds, and we're delighted that they've joined us today. So if we could just maybe start, Kirat, it's been a wild ride for all of us in this world lately, and could continue for an indeterminate amount of time. And certainly the investment world is always susceptible to events, but do you think that this time around, this crisis in particular, maybe this dual crisis we could call it, has highlighted the need for trading technology to be disrupted, and why is
that? Firstly, thanks very much, Michael and Institutional Investor, for having us. Really appreciate you folks giving us the opportunity to do this. Just maybe a quick intro, though I think Michael has already covered a bunch of it. Mark and I, both have actually worked together for almost 17 years before. Started at Goldman, or at JP Morgan, where we launched Athena. I was at Bank of America, where I launched the Quartz trading system there, which is now their strategic risk and trading platform. And when we started out to do Beacon on our own, I think it was just the view that these are all shared problems that everyone in capital markets and finance is trying to solve, and an open, transparent platform is the right way to solve it. Big believers in open source and transparency. So just going back to this crisis, yeah, it's unprecedented, right? It's like, I think the world is just so much more connected now. So these crises have so much more impact on things. And what we've seen too is, like, if you look at most large firms, you have hundreds of applications that you rely on in order to do your business, and each of them have sort of their own silo almost, and not because you intended to do it that way. That's just how it happened. Everything was sort of purpose-built. You get an app to solve a problem. Each application ends up with its own little tech stack. And now, especially when you're moving to remote work, you have to it's very hard to maintain that distributed set of applications suddenly. And what we've seen a lot in terms of technology, again, is most folks are just spending a lot of their effort and energy sort of keeping the lights on. Say you have 2,000 applications, which is not an unreasonable number for a big bank or an institution. Like, you have a few people dedicated to each one of them. You have to make any change, you have to make it in all of those independently. And so, we've seen things like, 80% of your tech budget being just keeping the lights on, essentially your BAU, right? Very little money and time left over to innovate. And I think COVID has just exposed that, right? And I think folks who have less legacy and have more integrated application stacks and elasticity in infrastructure and just collaboration between teams, that they have performed better. Because, really, it's easier to collaborate when you're all in the same office. And now suddenly, you're disconnected. Collaboration tools become super important. Being able to get your work done without having to, rely on physical infrastructure, I think is really, really critical.
And are there any, would you say there's any red flags in particular that if you're looking at how your technology is performing during this crisis, something, things you should be on the lookout for that would indicate to you that it's, letting you down?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it is just related to how much, just the complexity of your infrastructure, and making sure that you can easily transition to remote work. That means everyone is remotely logging into their desktops. If you're reliant on your desktops, that's very, very hard, right? Because suddenly you may not have access to it. You can't go reboot the server underneath your desk that's running your custom database or something like this. And then I think the other big one in terms of at least technology is, how do you onboard new vendors? How do you plug, people always want to get new data. How do you manage to set that up? And the more you are purely cloud or in virtual environments, easier it is to do that. And that's what we've seen.
Okay, great. And now, Mark, turning to you, Kirat was talking a little bit about how, what firms are experiencing at the moment, and is helping them identify and solve these issues, why you both started Beacon in the first place. And maybe we could take a trip back in history a little bit, and you could talk about the problems you set out to solve initially and how that's evolved along the way.
Yeah, great, thanks. I'm Mark Higgins, Kirat's co-founder, and to start with this, I also wanted to say thanks for having us. We're excited to chat. So to answer your question, maybe I'll just start with some history. So Kirat mentioned that before we started Beacon, we both spent our careers on trading desks at some of the biggest investment banks in the world, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. And during that time, we lived through some of the defining market crises of our time. The 1998 Asian financial crisis, when long-term capital management blew up. 2001, when the internet bubble burst and equities businesses got demolished. 2008 credit crisis and the subsequent Great Recession, when kind of everything got demolished. The Eurozone crisis in 2011, when European credit markets were beat down. So we ended up seeing a lot in our time at those banks. And those experiences taught us some important lessons about how to approach technology in financial institutions. So I think kind of the first lesson we learned is that flexibility is really critical. When markets are going crazy, if you can respond quickly, you can take advantage of the huge opportunities that crop up there. But if you can't, then you end up getting run over. Second thing we learned is your technology needs to be robust, right? So if traders or portfolio managers can't trust the risk numbers or trading signals that are coming out of their machine, then they just can't trust it to make informed trading decisions and take advantage of those opportunities in volatile markets. Unfortunately, those two key lessons are kind of at loggerheads, right? So the easier it is to make changes and be flexible, the easier it is to let mistakes slip through and kind of break the system and break that trust. So I think probably the most important lesson we learned through all of that was how to strike that balance between flexibility and robustness. That is, how to be nimble when you're making changes quickly, that also satisfy this kind of complicated technology control requirements that modern financial institutions have built up to minimize errors. So really, we started Beacon to deliver those kind of hard-learned best practices to our clients. You asked how our goals evolved. It was kind of interesting. When we first started, our vision of the company was that we were going to build a trading and risk system and try and make it transparent by backing it with a really powerful platform. We realized pretty quickly, in the first year, though, that we had the priority kind of the wrong way around. Really, the platform is the secret sauce with this stuff. The platform is what lets our clients focus just on their edge, right? How their business makes money, without having to worry about all the complicated technical foundations that they're building that on top of. And really, that's what makes it possible for us and for our clients to innovate in the trading and risk management space when the market demands rapid change.
Okay, cool. It's interesting to me that you were able to identify that quickly, inside of a year, how the sort of change gears in terms of what the goals should be. And then those goals evolved, as you mentioned, and Kirat, now here we are, you guys, everybody's sort of humming along, economy's great, and then boom, COVID-19, economic turmoil. What did you say? I know we've talked a little bit before that you've seen that your Beacon platform clients are weathering the storm better than many others using other platforms. I'm curious, what was it that you saw that indicated that was the case? And maybe if you could share some examples of that, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, like as Mark said, there's always this trade-off between flexibility and stability. And I think like I remember Facebook used to have the motto of like, move fast, break things. And they've since walked that back. And, we sort of lived that line pretty much all our lives, right, at banks, that you want to be flexible, but, the stakes are super high on a trading desk, right? It's like you're always mark to market. So any mistake you make gets magnified. And I think, it was really interesting when we started out, like our goal, like we had supported market making trading desks. And we're like, oh, we should take these same tools and offer them to other clients, because there's like pretty much, if you're trading, it's all bilateral. There's somebody else who has that. And other institutions haven't invested the amount of money and capital in building these trading tools that banks have. So in a sense, they're at a disadvantage. And what we found is exactly as Mark said, it's the development platform that enables those. Like everything we do now is driven by technology. The more you can empower your technologists and your quants to work with the business and reduce that friction, that's what makes you innovative. That's what makes you more commercial as a business. And so I think like the way our platform is configured is exactly that. You're a first-class citizen in the platform, whether you are an end user or a developer or a quant. And I think most things miss that, right? They build something that's either for exactly an end user or exactly a developer, but really you need to put all these things together. And what we saw really was all our clients are putting this together themselves. So even though this is like, 2020, you still install software and configure things the same way as you did it pretty much 20 years ago. Every client has to figure out how to do that. And so I think our goal with Beacon was to, after this shift that we found is create this cutting edge, innovative development platform that's cloud native, that's fully integrated. And you can, even if we haven't integrated something or thought about it, we give our clients the tools to do that. Because in the end, it's really just a bunch of, we call them containers running on the cloud, and anything can run in a container, and we give people a way to manage those containers and integrate them into the system. So I think what we've seen, especially in this turmoil, is you need a new data source, you need new analytics, you need new infrastructure, super easy to integrate. And your clients, our clients, if they need to run more scenarios on demand, they don't have to wait for servers to arrive in a data center. They can spin them up elastically on the cloud and give them back when they're not using them. Because, interestingly, I think the cloud hasn't been that affected in terms of capacity, which is kind of an interesting thing to look at too, right? Because you'd think everyone moving to the cloud would have affected capacity, but it, that means there's, the cloud providers are doing a good enough job to provide resources that clients can use, because really that's their business. And so I think, there's this whole sort of build versus buy thing. And, again, one of our goals with Beacon really was everyone is solving the same problems. There's this shared pain. We want to take away that shared pain. Like everyone's edge now isn't in building a swap pricing model. It's in offering some unique risk or some tweak to a model, or, figuring out how to serve their clients better. And we want folks to focus on their edge. And so we always say, it's not buy versus build, it's buy and build on top. And I think that's really has been the benefit to our clients in this environment, because you suddenly have to do something new. Do you start from scratch, especially in an environment where it's very hard to acquire new resources, have capital spend, hire people? But Beacon already has those components. They're flexible, they're open, they're transparent source. You can just go tweak them and use them. And also, it was super easy for our clients to transition to working from home if it was Beacon, right, or wherever else, because all cloud hosted. Even if you don't have a powerful desktop at home, you just have a laptop or even a tablet, just works, because all the compute runs in the cloud. Data and compute are co-located. You can spin up more compute there, and you just have a window into that through your desktop. So disaster recovery kind of just works. Scale just works. So again, I think really what we've been sort of proud of here is that we've allowed clients to continue to focus on their edge without adding stress into like how to scale up things or add new components into the platform.
Yeah, I think a couple interesting examples.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say, you asked about, some examples. I think a couple interesting examples, we had, early in the pandemic when crude oil prices were going crazy, there was extreme volatility, futures prices even traded negative at one point. So there were a lot of interesting trading opportunities alongside lots of risk. And we have one client in the commodity markets who wanted to take advantage of that volatility and trade it. But they hadn't traded oil before in their current business. So they use Beacon. Beacon's a comprehensive cross-asset trading system. So they were able to get up fully configured trading crude oil futures and options products in days. And that's everything from pre-trade analytics like time series analysis and fundamental analysis through real-time risk management of complex positions, all the way through integration with execution platforms and accounting systems to get that full end-to-end automation of their new business. Another example, we have a bank client. They've got their cross-asset derivatives portfolio in Beacon. And in the early days of the pandemic, they wanted to run that portfolio through a whole bunch of complicated forward-looking stress scenarios. They're able to quickly design those scenarios in Beacon's out-of-the-box risk framework, but the harder part is actually running those scenarios. Their derivatives positions include complex structures that take a long time to value, so stress calculations are inherently kind of computationally expensive. But with Beacon, they are able in minutes to spin up a new pool with hundreds of computers in it to run those calculations. They paid for the computers only while they were using them. When they're done, they shut down automatically and were given back to the cloud. So they could do those stress calculations really quickly. And that new pool that they built ran right alongside their regular compute pool, which continued to run their business as usual stuff kind of uninterrupted.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's kind of interesting. I mean, of course, we only found out about this because they're like, oh, we're adding 2,000 more cores on demand. And yeah, it just works. There's a couple of little creaky things here. Can you help us fix that? And of course, we can fix that. And it's really exciting to be able to do that for folks, right? And the neat thing with the cloud is you pay for what you use. So it's not like you suddenly have this capital commitment for 2,000 cores. You just basically use them for half an hour and you solve your business problem.
You mentioned a few minutes ago, Kirat, that the cloud capacity hasn't been stretched. And I think that this might be a rather simple question, but I'm just curious if, do you see the future of, let me rephrase that. Will the crisis accelerate a move to the cloud for financial institutions that aren't already fully doing that? I mean, I would imagine the answer is yes, but
I think so. And we started this business pretty much on the premise that people should never buy a computer in a data center again. And it's really because you have to align yourself with the hardware cycles, refresh cycles for data centers, there's security, and that's ever increasing. There's denial of service attacks. So the attack vectors get more and more complex, right? And sure, a big bank like Bank of America or somebody can manage that, right? Because they have literally 250,000 people. But imagine a small bank and a small institution. They don't have the level of internal expertise to do that. So I think really, in a way, the cloud is much more secure because it's Amazon and Google and Microsoft's job to make it secure. They can also plan on the refresh cycles. And yes, specialized stuff I think you'll always do on your own. But I think the vast majority of compute is not that way. Right? So we totally think that's accelerating. A child. Sorry.
That's good. That's good timing. We can segue to the next question. Mark, you rattled off a list of what might be called crisis events a few minutes ago when you were giving some examples. And which always makes me think there's always the next crisis to worry about, because if you can go back and rattle off past crises without even looking at a piece of paper, there's always going to be a next crisis. So what has this crisis taught you about why trading and risk systems need to be resilient when the next new type of market crisis happens? And beyond that, where do you see the future in general of risk management systems headed?
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is from U.S. Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh. He said, "If you've seen one financial crisis you've seen one financial crisis. His point is that every crisis involves something new, and you never really even find out what questions you want to ask until you're kind of neck deep in it. So that has real implications for how to approach risk management, right? Like, your risk system needs to be flexible enough that you can ask it unexpected questions when the heat is on and get reliable answers out of it. So, what's kind of the common thread between crises? Well, like we were saying before, the other side of, lots of risk is potentially lots of opportunity. And if you can trust your risk system to keep up, you can take advantage of those opportunities while everyone else is kind of struggling to keep their heads above water.
Yeah, it's really interesting how I think like when there's a crisis, what we've seen in the past too is that there's suddenly teams that haven't spoken to each other, or at least speak to each other on maybe a monthly basis, like for capital or collateral and things, and they have to talk right now. And they need the data right now because you need to make a decision on, do you have enough collateral? Do you have enough liquidity? What's your risk? And it's like almost, it's in the highest stakes environment when you need to connect these teams and make them collaborative and trust the data. So I think really the only solution around that is making sure that your risk systems are transparent, flexible, and data is always integrated. I think most often people really run things batch mode, or we'll like get capital numbers at the end of the month or something like this. So you're relying on these manual data integration processes, and that doesn't work in a crisis, right? Because if you imagine that it's like sometimes it takes you 2 weeks to get your capital collateral numbers, and right now you need to get them right, you may be making decisions of data that's wrong. And so I think that's really how risk systems we think need to evolve. Completely integrated, right? You should be able to run in intraday mode and trust the intraday numbers as much as you trust your end of month numbers, and cross asset. So, for example, a bunch of our clients too, like, you could have equities only or risk only funds. And if equities markets go down, do your rates funds go down? Is it because there's some implicit credit risk on the equity markets that you haven't captured? How do you run those scenarios? How do you decide that? You can't do that unless your risk system is cross-asset. So I think, again, having the ability to model all your assets rather than having these disconnected, siloed systems, I think is really, really critical to be able to weather a crisis and make the correct decisions there.
Okay, great. So sort of the same question, but with a slight twist, and that is how should financial institutions assess the resilience of their trading technology in the context of the next potential crisis?
Yeah, I think that there are like four main questions we think financial institutions should be asking of their technology partners to make sure their systems are resilient. The first one, that Kirat just mentioned is your technology integrated? Right? An integrated platform means that you can change like a piece of data or improve a piece of functionality just once and have that change applied everywhere across the business. The opposite of integrated is siloed. So you have lots of different point solutions in different parts of the business with data and functionality kind of duplicated all over the place. Point solutions, and like a standard one is spreadsheets. They're great when they're first built because they solve a problem quickly. But over the span of a few years, they end up miring your business in the mud because any change needs to be copied like dozens or hundreds of times into these different silos. Second question is it future-proof? Traditional vendors tend to publish a new update to their product once a year or something like that. Clients often end up skipping a release or two and then end up waiting years to upgrade. And that upgrade process ends up being horribly expensive and time-consuming. The future is like what happens to apps on your phone. It's like continuous deployment of incremental new functionality with lots of small releases happening all the time, backed by extensive automated testing. The third question we think is important to ask is it focused, right? You shouldn't have to be experts at the entire stack anymore. It's been becoming like increasingly complex over the years to do that. Instead, you should be able to focus your development resources mostly on your edge. When I look back at, when Kirat and I started at big banks in the 90s, everything was kind of new and relatively simple from the technology perspective, and it made sense for them to hire the best developers and just build everything top to bottom in-house. But today, the technology that your edge runs on top of is both too complex to really match in-house and also commoditized enough that you don't need to. The fourth question that we think people should ask about resiliency is your technology transparent? You should be able to open the hood and just kind of see how everything works so that you can respond better in a crisis when different pieces kind of start overheating. That means transparent source code, right? You should get the source code to the stuff that you use so that you can dig deep enough into the system when you're tracking down a problem. But it also means things like real-time dashboards and analytics for all the different components that make up your system.
Yeah, and I think actually just adding to that, so like one simple metric I think about whether you're resilient or you can adapt to a new crisis is how quickly can you add a new business? And, we talk to a bunch of folks and they're like, they want to trade a new asset class. And sometimes it'll take months or years to actually set up all the systems so you can trade it, even though you might have capital committed and be ready to go and have hired traders. And can you actually do this without adding a new disconnected silo? So I think that's really one thing we think is really powerful about Beacon. You have a cross-asset system. You don't have to transition to a new system in order to trade a new asset class. I think another interesting metric of resilience for me is also how quickly can you make a change that affects everything in the stack? And I think all these crises in the past have driven market term structure changes. If you looked at 2008, LIBOR suddenly didn't work anymore. Everyone had to use OIS. And I remember when we were sitting on the desk at JP, in a way, sometimes people were like, well, actually, we should be tweaking the forward points because we aren't going to give Bank X the same funding rate as Bank Y when we never thought about this before. And that was a super easy change for us to make in a system like Athena, but very hard to do if you have multiple different analytics and pricing tools and risk management tools and things like this, right? And now we see the same thing happening now. There's SOFR showing up, right? So like, how are you going to make the change through all your systems to actually incorporate that? I think there's always also these, because of legacy in a way, there's always these implicit technology dependencies that you have that you've built that worked, that were fit for purpose for the time, and that have never evolved or changed. And like I think one of the banks, actually, Mark also remembers this. We were at a bank where trading FX real-time spot, and there was a trade counter that was set to 1 million. And of course, one day we hit it. And like, oops, I remember being on a call and everyone is like, what do we do now? And then be like, okay, we are flat at beginning of day and flat at end of day, and these are FX spot trades. Let's set the counter to 0. Because those trades were long enough ago that they've rolled off. And it worked, but like, I don't like those adrenaline rushes. And I think, again, just a platform where everything comes together. Risks, trades, market data, reference data, and all your research data. The more you have at your fingertips when you're trying to make a decision, the easier it is to weather a crisis.
So in the current crisis, the types of businesses we're talking about, financial institutions, asset managers, they didn't really have much of a choice but to have everybody on their teams collaborate. But from a technology standpoint, hopefully they had most of what they needed in place, but what would they have had to have had in place to execute without a slip up? And in your experience, if you heard anything from the market, what were organizations discovering they lacked that they should have had in their platform that they didn't?
Of course, a lot of this is all hindsight. And now I think what people have found they will help with this crisis. But, I think all these things make us better. And you add DR plans that work and if you put them all together. So I think an easy one, of course, is that transitioning to remote work. Like, I don't think anyone could have expected that suddenly 20,000 people are going to be working from their bedrooms. So making sure that you have enough remote work capabilities, hardware, infrastructure set up to do that. And then also be able to sustain that, because it's very different to do that on a one-off basis, but then to actually continue to do that for like 3-4 months. Like, after 2001 in New York, there were a bunch of people trading from home. But again, everyone, and I think the exchanges were closed for like 2 weeks or something. But everyone knew there was a time-boxed event. And with COVID, that has not been the case, right? It's literally been months and may even be years. So I think being able to manage your infrastructure and have, I think web-based applications is really the way forward there, right? Everything should now run through Chrome browsers because the browser has really become sort of the user interface of choice. It is powerful enough, it's a flexible sandbox, and then multi-tier applications in the back end that you can scale and collocate compute and data. I think that's really where everyone is going to, and people who hadn't done that, I think, are having the most trouble. And I think the other big one here is not security for remote work. I don't think anyone ever imagined this, like, in the old days, you can't even use a cell phone on a trading floor. And you can imagine how that's like, not like, yeah, everyone is, yeah, my kids come in every once in a while, right? And of course, I don't think they're a security risk. But, security needs to be really built into your system from the ground up. You can't bolt it on later. And I think that's something that I think folks are having to do a lot of scrambling on. And I think a lot of this also depends on existing heterogeneous systems, right? So if you have a lot of manual intervention, handoffs between things, that's very hard to manage. And I think it's, again, because it's harder to collaborate because we're all remote. It's harder to go, tap the middle office person on the floor, on the shoulder, and see on the floor, like, what happened to my trade. And so I think it's like building all those workflows, automating them, integrating all of them. How do you deal with, for example, allocating servers in a data center, scaling your network infrastructure, scaling your storage when you can't get deliveries and there's the supply chain is messed up. Ideally, you just want to go to the cloud and spin stuff up.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, one of the cool things about Beacon is, like, we end up doing that stuff for our clients, all the stuff that Kirat just mentioned, right? All our stuff runs in the cloud through a browser. We really understand security and built it into our products from the ground up, assuming that you're going to be, operating through a browser so that our clients can trust their data safe. All of our infrastructure is managed automatically in the cloud uniformly. So it's all nice and homogeneous. You can spin up as much. I mean, you only pay for it while you use it. So it makes it a lot easier to kind of do that transition.
Okay, great. Yeah, I suppose it could be said that if you get right down to it, there's really two types of technology. There's the end user interface and interaction, and then there's everything else. So, I mean, what's important for the end user experience to be as seamless and efficient as possible? And what do you think is of primary importance for the invisible technology requirements that end users don't think about? I'm saying invisible is my sort of guy who doesn't understand technology.
No, I mean, I think, again, as Mark said earlier, things have gotten so complex now that there's all these things that we think, are just work behind the covers. I mean, I was math in college, and I remember the old joke that, Gauss was the last person who understood all of math. And this is, what is it, like 200-300 years later? But, I think most systems have been designed around, you have a desktop, you have a fast network interface, you have folks to help you, fix your applications when they're wrong. And that's just out of the water now, right? And I think we could all take, learn from like mobile apps that have really taken off over the last 10 to 15 years. I have like this little device here. This is an inherently unreliable network. The device itself is unreliable, potentially, has been jailbroken or whatever. But yet all my apps work. And they work actually more often than a lot of my corporate apps. So I think it's really just designing your application so that they are fault tolerant, that you have, elasticity, fault tolerance both in the front end and the back ends, be able to scale your compute and data offline, essentially, and your app really is just a view into that. And I think what's really interesting with a lot of these things now is that, like, all the retail applications have gotten so much better. Like, if I look at a Google thing, I can see my messages on my phone, on my computer. They're sort of linked up into my email. There's like this continuity across all these applications, which I think is missing from a lot of these siloed enterprise apps, just because they haven't been built that way. And I think the other thing, of course, is performance. Of course, like, our end user edge devices are actually quite powerful now. But I think it's how do you scale that beyond a single device? And when we started on Wall Street, like everyone had, their computers were the most powerful devices, like the desktops that you had. And it slowly shifted over to having these things all in the in server rooms, which ended up being more powerful. And even now, yet I can buy a very powerful desktop, but it's just one desktop. It doesn't scale beyond that, right? I cannot horizontally scale that, and if I have no access to it, I'm screwed. So I think it's really making sure that you can build horizontally scalable back-end devices with no single points of failure. I think that's really sort of the key invisible technology requirement that we care about. And we think about that a lot. We've designed databases. Actually, the database I designed at Bank of America, which is the last one, is now literally stores petabytes of data. And I think we are enabling similar things for all our clients.
Yeah, Kirat mentioned how that sort of like retail experience is what end users are looking for, and I think that's absolutely right. And then some others kind of like of the invisible technology behind that's important, especially for like enterprise technology scale stuff. More so than like a game that runs on my phone is a few other things. It needs to be accurate, right? Like you really need to be able to trust the results. You need to be able to trust it while you're under fire. Or traders and portfolio managers just won't end up taking risk based on it. And that means it needs to include like enterprise scale controls. Like all these big financial institutions work under complicated regulatory restrictions that determine how you're allowed to like change your production technology environment. It's really tricky to get that right. You also need to have a proper kind of white glove support model. So when things are going wrong, when you're under fire in a crisis, you need quick responses and quick fixes when those technology issues cause you business problems. And again, like security really needs to be central, especially when you're doing stuff in the cloud. Like when you rent a computer in the cloud to use it, someone else has used that computer before you and someone else is going to use it after you. So you need to make sure that the data that you put onto it won't leak out. Obviously this because it's the right thing, but also because there's often really strict regulations for financial institutions on data privacy that they need to satisfy.
Yeah, I remember that great quote saying, there is no cloud, there's just somebody else's computer.
Yeah.
So we were talking a little bit about resilience before, and then another really key word that gets talked about a lot today and across investing is flexibility. So even with the latest technology, as we were just talking about a little bit, you still need to have that flexibility. So what's necessary to being able to make fast and as they say in sports, play fast but under control. So fast but controlled changes to the platform, and how does the Beacon platform sort of optimize that?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. This is something that we've learned kind of through our careers growing up at banks and working with our clients at Beacon on like how to strike that balance, because you need to kind of be able to make changes at the speed of the business, right? And especially because like on trading desks, people don't know what their requirements are. When they ask for some new piece of technology, it's very fuzzy, and often they change their minds halfway through. So it's really important to have a kind of iterative development model where you put out a first version of something, get feedback, and advance it, and do that cycle over and over. And so you want those cycle times to be short. So you need to be able to make kind of quick releases into your production environment. But on the other side of that is the controls, right? If you can make really quick changes, what's to stop you from making a change without properly testing it and then like blowing up your production environment so no one trusts your machine anymore? So that's something that we spend a lot of time trying to get right. And Beacon has those like workflow tools for managing that process that lets you still make these like small atomic changes, especially for kind of new functionality that the business doesn't fully depend on yet, while still satisfying all the control policies that you have on how to make sure that you don't blow things up, making sure that you have proper testing and proper sign-off and review and things like that. So we really think we found an optimal balance for that between innovation control, based on our time at banks and at Beacon, that lets our clients respond quickly to market conditions changing while satisfying all their internal control requirements. like doing that is really hard though. And I think that's part of the value that we provide to our clients with Beacon. They get this kind of bulletproof, battle-tested platform to build stuff on top of. So all of our clients get that benefit of this kind of shared resilient set of tools that wrap up all the stuff that Kirat and I and our team have learned through our careers. And it lets financial firms like spend less time kind of agonizing over their technology core and more time, just figuring how to add value to their business.
Yeah, I think it's actually that balance is the hard part. And, I think what's interesting always is when you build something first, you want to make it as easy for the developer as possible. You want to reduce friction for them or the quant. And then when you deploy it, you want to reduce friction for the end user to also interact with the person who's built it and, fine tune the thing that they've built. And typically, you don't have any controls when you first build something, and then you have to bolt on the controls when you roll it out to production. And so I think really what we've done over all these years is sort of like ridden that fine edge, right? To say, like, give developers control, it's flexibility and agility, and make it super easy for them to use version control. Everything is versioned and controlled by default. And then you can slow down the rate at which you release it to production, or, you can add the right gates and you can add the right testing on top of that, because you know your business best. You might say, I'm willing to tolerate risk here or not here, and we just want you to make informed decisions. I always say, actually, control isn't about process. It's about understanding what changed. And if you understand what changed, you can then decide what the right impact of that change is. And that's really what Beacon allows you to do at every level, whether it's data, whether it's code, whether it's infrastructure. And I think, again, this is something we see everyone trying to do. And like our view here was take away that shared pain, give people the tools to do that, and let them focus on really what their business problem is. And we do that also by transparent source. We are, I think, the only company out there in capital markets that gives people all their source code. Because we really believe in this model of open source in a sense and transparency. See how we've done things, step into it, debug it, understand how it works, give us feedback. We learn from our clients as much as they learn from us. So I think a lot of it is that partnership around it. Mm-hmm. And I think just the more flexible you are, and we're always designing to be for the future, right? It's like if you build something, make sure that you can replace it. Because if you become too reliant on some piece of technology in a way, it means that you've made some assumptions in your head that are hard-coded that you can't change. Like I remember when we built some databases at JP Morgan in the past, right? It's like, okay, I want this at least to a bunch of counters and timers and things. They should work at least for the next 70 years.
Before we get to some questions from the audience, just one more quick question for you. You were just talking about, Kirat, basically put the developers in charge, or I'm paraphrasing what you said, but and you meant that's sort of been a core philosophy of your business, I think. So, Mark, I'm just wondering how's your platform evolved to, sort of put things in the hands of the developers and let them do their jobs and collaborate with their colleagues and give their business an edge overall, competitive edge.
Yeah, Beacon was designed with these kind of commercial developer teams in mind: quants, data scientists, financial engineers, front office coders, people like that. What it does is it gives them this powerful set of enterprise technology tools so that they can focus on just quickly solving business problems without having to be experts at all the underlying technology stack. So our tools kind of help them be amazingly productive while avoiding falling into that spreadsheet hell trap of many siloed little technology stacks that kind of developer team often falls into. And the cool thing, the real purpose of all of this is when those kind of developers are free to focus on real business problems because they already got this great platform that takes care of the hard enterprise technology bits. They just end up understanding the business better because they're in it more. And that lets them be even more commercial partners in the business. And that, in the end, that's the real secret sauce. Today's businesses are so dependent on technology that you can't afford them not to be partners. And a lot of traditional companies are learning that lesson the hard way. Ultimately, it comes down to what is the return on investment that you expect from technology and R&D spend. And fundamentally, Beacon just kind of helps increase that return.
That's exactly right. I think every business is so technology dependent now. If you don't empower your developers, you can't compete. And I think that's the way we think about the tools we give people with Beacon, right? Like the way I think about this is you're innovative if you can try new things cheaper, faster, safer. And, like often when you're trying to do something new, there's some initial cost to set it up. We want to lower that barrier of entry. Again, with the cloud, super easy, right? You spin up a GPU if you want. You pay for it literally by the minute. It's like literally $10, right? Rather than in the old days, which is like, I need to buy a $10,000 computer and stick it underneath my desk so I can try this new GPU model. And then faster because you already have a bunch of the scaffolding to put together so you can just focus on your problem rather than saying, how do I actually get started with CUDA and all these other things? And you spend months doing that and you find it doesn't work. And then safer because when you put this out there, you want to do it in a way that doesn't impact production. And I think like for us, being able to run things alongside with existing production, read-only access to productions, gate them in at the risk level that you're willing to take. So I think that's what makes you innovative, right? Because if it's easy to try new things and it's cheap, you'll try new things and you'll find the ones that work and you can iterate faster. So and again, like everything we've built is around enabling that model, right? It's like transparent source code, empower folks to like look anywhere in the stack and, be, just as comfortable if you want to spin up infrastructure, manage storage, networking, cloud, quant models, option pricing, write applications for end users, take risk or trade. And also I think collaborate, because again, collaboration is what makes us successful as a company, as a team. And the easier it is to use something that someone else has written and work with them on that, just the more effective we are as an institution, as a company, or just, people.
Okay. We have a couple of questions from the audience. Maybe we can go to them while looks like we have about 10 minutes left. This first question comes from someone that says, I guess it's never easy being a proponent of change. This person is saying that they are a proponent of transitioning to the cloud within their business, but they get pushback that it's complicated. Can you tell me how Beacon might make that transition a little easier?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The cloud is really complicated. So there's a bunch of hurdles to cross there, right? One is my data secure? How do I actually set up workflows on that so that, I give people the right level of access without risking exposure of data? And then, what's going to be the time to market to get the application that I want to actually do on the cloud? And it's always the case when you're trying to do something different. It'll take longer the first time, but you hope it'll take a shorter time after that. And that's one of the reasons we started Beacon, because it felt like everyone is going through this. And that's why we are capital markets focused, not anything else, because a lot of our core platform is generic. It's like we feel like we understand the problems in capital markets. We've been there. And we can help accelerate that for you because we have the right data models, the right application delivery mechanism. But yeah, it is definitely a leap of faith to some extent. And we want to make it as easy as possible by just giving people like a POC environment that you can try out. Mark, anything you want to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately moving to the cloud is tricky for a lot of big financial institutions because it's kind of a different like mental model, right? Like traditional technology infrastructure teams over the last 25 years are used to this idea, like I buy a bunch of computers and I put them in racks and some human like shells into them and sets them up. And now I've just got some computers for the next 3 years until they depreciate and then I get some more. Whereas the cloud, like a better metaphor is there's this infinitely deep pool of compute that I can dip into whenever I want, as much as I want, pay for it just while I use it and then check it back in. And kind of transitioning between those two models is tricky. And that's something we help our clients with a fair bit, is like figuring out how to make that transition, because Beacon, this sort of gives out of the box a lot of tools for doing that sort of thing.
Okay. Let's see, it's another question here. It's essentially about the legacy technology, I suppose. what would I notice? What would the difference be that I would notice if I was using the Beacon platform versus the sort of pitfalls of legacy technology?
I think actually, it's funny, it's a sort of joke that, like the only place where legacy is bad is in technology, is a bad word is in technology. But, legacy doesn't mean bad. It just means that it hasn't evolved. And I think that's really what we think a lot about with Beacon. So if we just pick one thing and use that, it will eventually become a legacy. And so it's all, I think, about being able to integrate with other things and use the right tool for the right job. Like, for example, we use Python for writing some models. We have C++ integrated with that. We write some stuff in Go. We've been writing services in Rust nowadays. We have JavaScript. We transition between different frameworks. And I think there's that almost like research that you need to keep doing to keep yourself current and do that transition. And everyone has to do it themselves. And we think really centralizing that in a place like Beacon, because that's our job, and we make it easy for our clients to use the right tools and give them templates to do that. So it helps them transition out of the legacy. Because I don't think anyone wants legacy, right? It just kind of happens to become that way because, and it's also whenever legacy works, you try something else, and that's a risk. And that doesn't add any value to your business while you're doing that transition. So I think just showing people things that work makes them much more comfortable to take that leap.
Okay, great. I think that we did. We do have another question from the audience, but I think you both answered it by answering those other two questions. So I think we have just a little bit of time. I don't know if you want to have any. Either of you would like to have any closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
I think for me, like what this comes down to is, we really believe that our products help developer teams that are our clients become kind of more active and commercial partners in their businesses. And that's why our clients end up loving us and finding ways to use our products more. We really think our products represent the future of finance on the cloud, and we're excited to see that future unfold.
Yeah, likewise. Firstly, thanks again for having us. I really appreciate the opportunity. I think what we've seen, the more we've been in this business now for the last 6 years, is that everyone kind of has the same problems, at least from our lens. And, those are the things that we love working with our clients to solve. And, we've learned so much about how, insurance companies, asset managers, banks, hedge funds are all the same in certain ways. And that's to do with reference models to be able to match market and then be able to focus on your edge, which is some unique risk or model that you want to add. And we want to make that as easy as possible. And it's super exciting for us to be able to help our clients, and especially in these times as well. So thank you to everyone who was listening.
Great. And we're delighted to have you both with us today. And before we sign off, a reminder to our audience that there are additional resources that will give you more information about the Beacon platform available for you to download. That's on your screen. And there's a very brief 2-question survey we'd ask you to take prior to getting on with your day. Thanks again to our audience for joining us today, and to Mark and Kirat for their time and insights. And thanks for being with us, everybody, and stay safe.